really lay a foundation for increased acceptance for and participation in sensitive programs. Additionally, they found that recruiting program staff from within the community and adequately investing in staff development helped improve program sustainability. Additionally, they highlighted positive role models from within the community itself to build greater ownership and acceptance and improved access to the community itself. What's important to note is that despite our best efforts, the likelihood of backlash occurring continues to exist. Organizations have therefore created several critical mitigation strategies to manage these scenarios. These include providing support and resources to survivors and their families in the aftermath of backlash, as well as creating relevant organizational processes and procedures that prioritize staff safety. To conclude, it's clear that backlash plays a significant role in program design and implementation and therefore affects our approach towards long-term behavior change. What we really need is a perspective shift in how we think about these programs that moves away from quantitative outputs towards more long-term and qualitative outcomes. What we also need is more open dialogue and frequent touch points between nonprofits, community members, and funders who work in the behavior change space. Creating these spaces can be transformative, not just in how we design and implement programs, but also how efficiently and effectively we're able to use resources and ultimately how we're able to affect behavior change towards the empowerment of adolescent girls and young women. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Sucharita. And while this was a recorded presentation, Sucharita is here for any questions that you may have. Extremely interesting to and a little shocking to look at the stark figures. We all know that there is a backlash, but looking at these figures sort of brings you back to reality. Moving on to our next presentation. Our next presenter is Yasmin Siddiqui. She is a PhD in demography and has over 20 years of experience in conducting baseline monitoring and evaluation research, both quantitative and qualitative techniques, and leading units in multi-country settings. She has also conducted trainings for individuals and teams in Bangladesh and West and South Africa on social and research issues and techniques. I think she has many published peer-reviewed journals and many unpublished reports as well, and received a gold award in Nielsen India for higher level multivariate analysis. So Yasmin will be presenting on gender norms among unmarried adolescent girls and boys in Sylhet and Chattogram divisions of Bangladesh, implications for SPCC programs. Over to you, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Sona, and good morning, everybody, and good day to everybody. Vishakha, will you be running the PowerPoint, please?
Yeah, there is some change. There is some change in the presentation sequence. So next would be Namita Mohandas, Ashima Mishri, and Kavita ji. Yasmin, yours is on 4th.
No problem, no problem.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the cooperation.
It's okay. So Sona, over to you.
Okay, thank you. And apologies about that. We will, I think there have been some last minute changes in the sequence. So our next presenter is going to be Ashima Mistry. And she's from Indus Greeks. She's the Chief Operating Officer and Project Lead, Game of Choice, Not Chance. Ashima has over 14 years of experience with designing, developing, and delivering serious games, simulations, and interactive experiences for various digital platforms such as web, mobile, as well as VR and AR. She and her organization have a demonstrated history of working across various sectors. She also led the product design and execution of 2 healthcare-focused serious games that won the grand prize at the Federal Virtual Challenge for 2 consecutive years. So the presentation we have today is Navigating an Adolescent Life Through an Avatar, a Game of Choice, Not Chance. Over to you, Ashima.
Thank you, Sona. We have a couple of other presenters on board, Kavita Ayagiri and Namita Mohandas. Kavita is the country director for Harvard Delafield International, which is heading this project that we are now going to present to you. And she is the India team lead for the same. She comes with a lot of experience in public advocacy, marketing information, is a senior consultant focusing on digital health. And currently she is representing Vihara Innovation Network. She's also the project lead for this at Vihara's end. And she's also a sort of scholar and teacher for social design programs. So just wanted to give a quick update on their bios before we proceed. Vishakha, will you be sharing our presentation?
Hello everyone, I'm Kavita Ayagiri, representing Harvard Delafield International. I'm really happy to be presenting at the South Asia SPCC Regional Conversation. Our presentation is about the game of choice, not chance. And navigating an adolescent's life.
Can I request everyone to please mute themselves?
The game of choice, not chance. Hello everyone, I'm Kavita Ayagiri, representing Harvard Delafield International, and really happy to be presenting at the South Asia SPCC Regional Conversation. Our presentation is about the game of choice, not chance, and navigating an adolescent's life through an avatar. The game of choice, not chance is a digital platform for mobile games. We want to use the power of gameplay to support young people, both boys and girls, to become active decision makers in their own lives. We also want the game to be a way to equip them to fully realize their potential. So that's the objective behind the game of choice, not chance games. What was the genesis when we started designing this game for girls? So essentially what we found was there are various challenges that girls face during adolescence. They lack the confidence to negotiate relationships. They have few reproductive health resources available to them. There is much less priority given to girls' education and career opportunities when you compare it with boys. And finally, early marriage and adolescent pregnancy remains a huge concern. Therefore, this game really wanted to address some of these challenges as to how can gameplay lead to an improvement in girls' agency to take decisions that matter. So here is our new role-play based game in which players get to meet Nisha. Nisha is the central protagonist. She's 19-year-old. She's a college-going girl. She has great aspirations for dreams. She also faces all the constraints that adolescent girls face during this age. This game has been co-designed with girls in India, in Delhi, in Rajasthan and Bihar, 3 states that we are concentrating on for this project. So before I give you a sneak peek into the game, let me just reiterate what our aims are. 1, we want to improve knowledge about menstruation, consent, family planning and reproductive health. 2, we want to improve agency, girls' attitudes and confidence and decision support for SRH. 3, we want to expand access to products, information and services which are useful for girls. And finally, we want to contribute towards digital game-based learning to the body of knowledge in digital health. And now, here's a small sneak peek into the game where Nisha meets the boy who's called Ayush. They both go out for a movie. So in this scene, you're going to see, Ayush asking her if he can kiss her, and Nisha has to give consent or decline. The game is a game of choice. Players will experience the outcome of their choices based on the choices they make.
मैं क्या करूं?
निशा, क्या मैं तुम्हें किस कर सकता हूँ?
अब क्या? ठीक है.
In order to build a game that helped us achieve our aims and objectives, as well as something that was contextually relevant for girls, we employed various forms of learning from girls throughout our product design lifecycle. In the early stages, formative research armed us with psychographic profiles as well as an in-depth understanding of girls' motivations and behaviors, specifically with regards to career, negotiation with their family, education, and their understanding of sexual and reproductive health. In addition, we also worked with a cohort of 24 to 26 girls over the period of a year and a half in order to test out our game mechanics, all of the game components, the artwork, the narratives, as well as the learning frameworks. This helped us understand usability, what was easy to understand, the game flow, and helped us iterate our product design from the beginning. Once the game has been launched, our in-game machine learning and predictive analytics model helps us analyze in-game behavior and data in order to be able to provide more targeted feedback to girls, thereby learning from their interactions with the game and guiding and providing them with specific inputs and feedback as per their profiles. Our game is developed for young adolescent girls between the ages of 15 and 19 in the northern Hindi belt of India. Young girls will role play as Nisha, the protagonist of our story, who lives in a small crowded corner of Delhi and struggles between her parents' expectations and her own personal aspirations to fulfill her dream of being a writer. Through her job, she travels across the country to meet various inspirational women who touch upon various aspects of reproductive health and hygiene. The game consists of 5 episodes where learning is scaffolded, beginning from simpler concepts and progressing to more complex concepts. The first episode centers around negotiation about identity and mobility with her parents so that she may be allowed to take on a new job and delay marriage for a few months. The second episode centers around self-care and an understanding of menstrual hygiene and management. Every episode is structured in such a way that the player may first be presented with a challenge, is then exposed to new information via the mentor and non-player characters that appear, and are then prompted to resolve a challenge in Nisha's life. These challenges are usually interpersonal and involve skills of negotiation and efficacy. The third episode progresses to concepts of consent and relationship negotiation, where Nisha must have a difficult conversation with her new boyfriend. The fourth episode centers around contraception and contraceptive negotiation. The player is introduced to various methods and the key concepts about fertility awareness. The last episode culminates in a test of self-efficacy
where Nisha is prompted to make a difficult decision about marriage and her own future. In this way, the game captures all of the learning objectives and goals that we set out with, as well as incorporating contextual nuances and narrative elements from the lives of girls that we conducted our research and prototyping with. So, how does the game work? The player role plays on behalf of the game's protagonist, making choices in behalf of Nisha's life and driving the course of her decisions and her narrative. When the player makes choices and decisions and interacts with the game elements, they get points related to the kind of decision that they make. Our points and scoring framework is divided into 3 core components: that of relationship, confidence, and health. These 3 elements of our scoring system reflect the essential principles that drive adolescent well-being. Health, relationship, and confidence in combination lead to good health and well-being outcomes. Through the course of the game and the narrative, players also engage with non-player characters within the game or mentor figures who provide Nisha, the protagonist, as well as the player, with key information and knowledge to help guide them and help them make better decisions. In addition to role-playing and engaging with mentors within the game environment, players also take action based on the product and service linkages that are presented to them within the game environment. Based on the knowledge that they gain and the challenge that they are trying to resolve, players are provided with linkages to certain products, whether they are menstrual hygiene products or counseling services, that they can then interact with through the game environment. Players are also provided linkages to elements like chatbots and websites and articles and additional videos so that they may learn more about key information pieces. Together, these 3 elements allow players to immerse themselves within the narrative, role play on behalf of the protagonist, engage with informative material and mentors within the game world, and take action in their own personal lives by interacting with useful products and services.
One of the key aspects of this game is enabling direct-to-consumer access for relevant and supporting information, products, and services. The access to these resources has been woven into the game design, and they cover the gamut of the key focus areas such as health, lifestyle, relationships, and career. This includes a video player within the game that showcases topic-relevant videos at key points within the narrative. We also offer direct purchase as well as information links to products and services such as those for menstrual hygiene and management. We've also developed and integrated a customized chatbot that allows players to ask questions, take quizzes on specific topics that they may have just encountered within the game. As part of the direct-to-consumer endeavor, we've sought out and built a community of organizations that exist to understand the needs and challenges that are continuously evolving for both adolescents and youth at large. And the main aim of these organizations is to work towards the creation of products and services that address the needs and aspirations of this demographic. The names and logos on this screen represent some of the organizations that we are partnering with on this project. Besides the key engagement of interacting with various characters or situations and making choices, the game also leverages different types of mechanics and interactivity that are very popular in games and with gamers. This includes the ability to customize your avatar, do a little bit of virtual shopping, interact with realistic 3D products, to know more about them and understand them better, play mini games that use mechanics such as those employed in Endless Runners, etc. The game is also supported by a microsite which offers additional information and resources for the players.
Where are we heading with the Game of Choice Not Chance platform for digital games? So we have a launch of the Girl game in May of 2022, followed by a digital campaign. We are seeking additional partnerships to link with existing adolescent sexual health programs. We're going to be using the predictive power of data through predictive analysis in the game. We are looking to expand regionally and produce new content on new topics, which can cover maternal health, COVID, climate change, and all its impact on girls' lives. And finally, we're also looking to make a game for boys. So engaging boys to advance gender equity is something that we're looking to do in 2022. Thank you for joining us, and do connect with us if you would like to partner with us and be a game changer.
Thank you so much, Kavita and the team. I think one of the advantages of a recorded presentation is that it is of a fixed time, but then the disadvantage is also that you cannot stop at midway. So this was a little longer than the 10 minutes, but very interesting, and keep your questions coming, please. As we move to the next presenter, we have Kuhika Seth, who's a development researcher with experience in qualitative research and design, in qualitative and design research on intersectional issues around gender and sexuality, such as intimate partner violence, sexual health, abortion rights, and HIV. She has led and contributed to a range of studies during her stints with IAVI and ICRW, Population Council, and Sambodhi Research and Communications. She has a master's in women's studies from Tata Institute of Social Sciences and holds a diploma in journalism from the Asian College of Journalism, Chennai. This presentation is from the project Couple Engage, conducted during her engagement with ICRW. She's currently with IRV, working as Manager Health Systems Research. The presentation is Gender Equitable Approaches to Engage Men in Family Planning Communication and Decisions in India, using evidence review and human-centered design. Over to you, Kuhika.
Thanks, Sona. I think the presentation has already been shared and it's recorded. I request Vishakha to please project it.
Okay, great. Vishakha, you have the presentation?
Yes, I'm presenting.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kuhika, and I'll be presenting on behalf of my team from the International Center for Research on Women and Vihara Innovation Network on our project Couple Engage. And the topic for the presentation is Gender Equitable Approaches to Engage Men in Family Planning Communication and Decision Making in India, using evidence review and human-centered design. To give you an overall project overview, FP policies in India have conventionally focused on population control and have had an instrumentalist approach. They haven't evolved as much as other discourses around mandatory comprehensive sexuality education for all, or that of using a rights framework for safe and consensual relationships as well as abortion. To add to all of this, unequal power relations accompanied with scattered and inaccurate knowledge inhibit couples from making informed choices on FP. The overall objective and goal for the project has been to develop gender equitable approaches on male and couple engagement in family planning with a focus on birth spacing and using exploratory review of evidence and human centered design. Just to take you through the various phases of the project had four crucial phases. The first one being evidence review, where we reviewed academic peer reviewed articles, programmatic briefs, and HCD programs keenly. After that, it was followed and informed by immersion visits in UP and Bihar in three districts each. The insights from both these phases then led us to our third phase of design and strategy. And of course, with COVID impacting all of us, we also conducted a remote qualitative study in both these states and tried to understand the change in dynamics and decision making and spousal communication also through that lens. For the fourth phase, it consisted of partner validation exercise and dissemination, in which we came up with all the 13 intervention directions as well as prototypes and solutions for the community at large to understand. I'll now be taking you through some of the key learnings that we had through the project and that led to the development of the approaches or the prototypes. The learnings have been presented as key thematic barriers that exist across our socio-ecological, from a socio-ecological lens, and this is also something that we call our conceptual framework. The 6 barriers that are presented exist at all levels of the ecosystem but have been mapped to some of them because they have the extent to which they play at some levels is different than the others. So to begin with, at the normative level, male dominance inhibits equitable spousal communication, efficacious contraceptive use, and collaborative decision making. Moving on to the health system levels, existing health system fails to recognize the role of men in family planning and is not equipped to engage them. At the same level is suboptimal quality of family planning services, and follow-up care forces women to bear contraceptive related complications on their own, and that influences their choices. When we come to the community and the family level, there is a very rampant existence of incorrect and inadequate understanding of one's own body, reproduction, and even contraception, which influences decision making on family planning. When we come to the couple as a unit, and that's also the primary unit of focus that we have, is that they're stuck between social norms and aspirations, and couples are constantly negotiating with pressure of having the first child immediately after marriage. When it comes to their intimate space, sexuality is driven by gendered power play around consent, pleasure, and performance, which again influences decision making and contraceptive use. Next, I would like to take you through the spousal communication trajectory that also goes on to inform the decision-making processes that the couple has. So the 4 stages of the spousal communication are the initiation, negotiation, the frequency and openness with which the couples communicate, which then goes on to affect also the quality of communication that they would have. So in the initiation stage, prior knowledge of FP plays a very big role in how both the partners react. Men largely like exploring methods on their own and do not like their partner telling them what to use. And the fear of consequences are also a hurdle for the women to broach the topic of FP. And they simply wait for men to take the decision sometimes. There are a lot of negotiations that happen within the couple space around sex and also around contraception. For men, ignoring condom use was seen as an effective avoidance strategy, and coercion to use condoms, where the women really pushed for it, resulted in negative reactions for themselves. Seduction, humor, were used as an effective condom negotiation strategy for young women. Many women also spoke of covert use, but that led to conflicts in their relationship. The frequency and the openness with which a couple communicate were also found to be very pertinent. Men were more receptive to communication that increased their sexual access to their wives, and they were more interested in that, and then subsequently also then listened to contraceptive use. Couples also look at in the Indian marital situations, couple do not where joint family system is still pretty dominant. Couples try and find pockets of time to converse. Women and men reported speaking at night or in the bedroom or when they were together out in the evening. The kind of communication that it led to were found to be largely of two kinds: constructive communication, in which there were which was verbal and had more direct communication, and there were non-verbal gestures between partners as well. Assumptive communication was there where there was absence of direct communication, and the couple made a lot of assumptions about each other's space and thoughts, the mind space that each other were in, and perceived a lot of things that were not true. After understanding the spousal communication trajectory, we sort of keenly look at the decision-making processes that come out from the kind of trajectory a couple takes. So there is sole decision-making, which is of course usually male-dominated. There is consultative, and then there is collaborative. So sole decision-making is where men viewed themselves to be more knowledgeable than their spouse, and as sole decision makers, and also became and cited them being the providers and procreators, and called themselves the de facto heads of households. Consultative decision making is where the man takes the woman's opinion, but mostly takes the decision himself and barely and merely communicates it to the woman. Women's opinion are also influenced by their husbands, and they are very afraid to voice their independent opinions. Collaborative decision making was rare, and it remained aspirational at best, where both the partners discussed their options. It was interesting to note that whereas reproductive decision making still had some women dominated decisions, because of the cultural script that women experience the pain of childbirth and reproduction, hence they can be allowed to take some decisions. Contraceptive decision making had none of this. All of these learnings, insights, interacting with partners, and a lot of other stakeholders who have been involved in the process of family planning or in sexual and reproductive health, the team arrived at some intervention directions. And of course, these were all co created with the various stakeholders I just mentioned. Some of the intervention directions were enabling couples to achieve their forward thinking aspirations, because we saw couples who had aspirations such as having a better life, or giving a better life to their next generation, or owning a smartphone, having a better house. So tapping on these aspirations to really make them think through family planning. Providing alternatives through notions of couple making. When we say that, that means that couple making is a phenomena which is usually very traditional, where couples play their set gender roles. But if we provide them alternatives to think and reimagine their roles, it may also have an impact on their family planning decisions. And again, encouraging family planning is as much about sex and intimacy as it is about other things. Actually, it is largely about sex and intimacy. So, encouraging sex positivity for mutual pleasure. The next one being acknowledging, visualizing, and mitigating health risks for women. The ability to see and think through how health can impact their relationship goals, their aspirations, their family life, and everything will help them take better and informed family planning choices. The next one being reframing masculine narratives to enable gender transformative behavior. Enabling enhanced understanding of one's own body will also lead to responsible, informed decisions around family planning and contraceptive use. breaking patterns of stigmatizing behaviors, of not doing the same thing again or doing things that are stigmatized by the community at large but are for your own well-being. Making men visualize conflict between the masculine roles of provider and procreator so that they don't feel the onus of taking those decisions by themselves, but actually get their partners to talk about these things and take a informed collaborative decision. And some of the others are gender transformation orientation for health system actors, as a lot of judgment, preconceived notions, misperception, myths are also induced by the health systems. So a training would be very useful. Also providing men with options to course correct their life trajectories and to account for and for their inhibiting impulsive behavior for both the man and the woman. We believe that these intervention directions, which lie at different levels of the ecosystem as well, can be clustered and clubbed together and sort of inform the next course, which will help us achieve our outcomes and goals and enable men and women as couples to come together and weigh their choices and think through their health behaviors and take informed decisions on family planning. Just to take you through some of the outcomes and goals that the project envisaged. Apologies in advance for the extremely text heavy slide, but I just wanted to list down everything that's there, and I'm sure the PowerPoint is available to you at a later stage. So some of the outcomes at the couple level that the project envisaged was that improved capability amongst couples to contemplate and seek family planning services. At the community and family level, it was to the enhanced acquisition and comprehension of knowledge on SRHR and FP. At the health systems level, it's the health systems approach towards family planning uptake shifts from being prescriptive to couple centered. And at the normative level, it's very, very pertinent that there are positive shifts in social and systemic attitudes and norms related to gender and family planning. And overall, really thinking through how you perceive family planning at all the levels that exist and how it's much more of an issue of choice and how you want to live your partnership, your companionship than anything else. The outcomes are then mapped to achieving these three goals, and those were facilitating couples to achieve efficacious spacing, reducing FP, family planning failure, and its health consequences on couples, especially women, improved reproductive autonomy among couples, and of course, make them see it as a decision that you need to take together collaboratively with the exact knowledge and the power to really change, to decide the course of your lives. Thank you everyone for being this wonderful audience and listening to me patiently. These were some of the insights I really wanted to share with you, but this is not all, and there is a gamut of work that the team has put together, and you can look at the microsite www.couple-engage.org. Thank you and best of luck.
Thank you, Kohika. I think this is a subject that we will never stop learning more from, and the importance is extremely is well acknowledged. So thank you for that presentation. And I think next on is Yasmin. Please keep your questions coming, everyone. I see a good interaction happening in the chat. So please keep the questions coming. Yasmin, I have introduced earlier, but just a quick reminder, she is a demographer with over 20 years of experience and uses both quantitative and qualitative techniques and leads units in multi-country settings. Over to you, Yasmin, for your presentation on gender norms among unmarried adolescent girls and boys. So another very interesting perspective.
Thank you, Sona, and thank you, everybody. Vishakha, will you please play the PowerPoint that I sent? Vishakha. Hello, Vishakha, will you please? Oops.
I'm sharing, ma'am. I'm sharing.
Yeah.
So you may start the presentation, Yasmin Siddiqa.
Thank you very much. First slide. Hello, everyone. So the title of the presentation is Gender Norms Among Adolescent Girls and Boys who are aged 15 to 19 years in two administrative divisions of Bangladesh, namely Sylhet and Chattogram. And we wanted to look at the implications for SBCC programs. This is based on the data collected for the baseline survey for the USAID Ujjivan SBCC project. And I'll come into the details. Next slide, please. So a very brief of the project. This is Ujjivan Social and Behavior Change Communication Project funded by USAID and implemented by by 3 organizations in Bangladesh, led by CCP, Center for Communication Program under Johns Hopkins University. And we work in 4 thematic areas, which are maternal, neonatal, child, adolescent health, then family planning, tuberculosis, and nutrition. And research has been the part of a nexus in the activity where we have transmedia activity, community mobilization activity, and capacity and system sending. So for the 4 thematic areas, we have a few influencing factors which are cross-cutting across the thematic areas. For example, couple communication, gender norm, social norm, etc. So from that perspective, we collected data for the baseline survey. Next slide, please. So we collected the data for baseline survey, and in that baseline survey, we had a series of questions on gender, on social norm, on couple communication, surrounding these 4 thematic areas. Next slide, please, Vishakha. Thank you. So from that data, we have analyzed the gender perspective for adolescent boys and girls. And before going into that, I'd like to share that in Bangladesh, almost 1/5 of the population are adolescents, aged from 10 to 19 years, who have the potential to accept new health behaviors or alter gender inequality perceptions in the society. Gender equitable norms are increasingly recognized as major drivers of health and well-being. However, there is little evidence on patterns of gender equitable norm among adolescents aged between 15 to 19 years. Next, please. Existing gender equitable norms among adolescents in Bangladesh are explored in the baseline survey, as I have mentioned earlier, to identify SBCC programming opportunities for adolescents as one of the main audiences for shifting gender norms. The quantitative data was collected from 1,000 randomly selected unmarried adolescents who are aged 15 to 19 years, including both boys and girls, equally distributed. And the gender equitable norms were measured to assess the patterns between the boys and girls. A thematic analysis from qualitative data was also conducted to understand the thematic areas related to gender norms. Next, please. So I would like to have a brief discussion on the way we calculated. From quantitative data, we calculated gender equitable norms. We measured it using an 18-item scale, which had a total of 5 subscales. And the qualitative data was used to understand a gendered environment in which adolescents live, how gender norms play out in their lives, and how girls differ from boys in their expectations of being a good woman or being a good man or being a good girl, being a good boy. And we also had and all these ideal good boys and girls are being seen for work arena, for household responsibility arena, and for education and other things. Next, please. So coming to the findings from the quantitative part, adolescent girls are included in the quantitative survey have a higher level of gender equity norms as compared to the boys. A significantly higher percentage of girls compared to the adolescent boys possessed higher gender equitable norms related to family issues, 47% versus 20%. Access to resources, 47% versus 16%. Family planning, 43% versus 23%. Violence, 41% versus 26%, and a composite of maternal, neonatal, and child health issues, 36% versus 25%. So you can see in some of the areas it's almost double or more than double. Next slide, please. From qualitative findings, we can see a strong suggestion that adolescent boys possess stereotypical gender perceptions about girls' roles and positions in the society, such as girls should walk slowly with head low and eyes to the ground. Girls should stay back home and take part in household activities only. And also, like, girls or women can come to an income generating role or income generating environment only after they complete their household activities. Girls agreed that these were expectations of what it meant to be an ideal girl, quote unquote, but they also expressed their dissatisfaction on such norms because they could easily easily elaborate that how these attitudes hindered their well-being or hindered their behavior or hindered their education and upbringing. Next, please. So we would like to conclude that the findings are consistent with other study findings, although not among adolescents, but among adults, suggesting the existence of an inequitable normative atmosphere where the girls and women are undervalued. Data also indicates that low gender equitable norms are formed in adolescence. Thus, boys are expected to be socialized into accepting male superiority and echo the same normative expectations of adult men. In the current complex normative environment, girls and boys do not see the gender restrictions on the girls because they have been into this environment for ages, and it has been seen as a norm. Thus, SBCC programs should focus on adolescent boys as a major audience and design specific programs to shift gender norms in boys. I'd like to add here that the project that I'm talking about here, this is coming from the baseline survey data. So based on the baseline data, later on, there were sessions from where the program took these lessons from the research, and they have adopted the findings, and the design later on in the intervention included these kind of findings, and a strong gender perspective were added to the active program activities. That is all for me. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yasmin, and thank you for sticking to the time. I'm sure there will be a lot more questions about how the the intervention was implemented and what were the results, but hopefully for another presentation. Thank you very much. We will now move to the last presenter of today's session. We are a little over time. I do hope that you have kept time aside to look at this presentation, as well as have a quick interaction at the end of it. We now have Mallika Thakaran. She's the Results Delivery Officer and lead for Knowledge Management at KHPT Bangalore. Mallika Thakaran is a social scientist working in the development sector for the last 14 years. She has a master's degree in social work from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences and currently plays the role of Results Delivery Officer and lead Knowledge Management at KHPT. She also has been a resource person with UNDP and BMGF to design and implement community mobilization strategies in Tanzania and Northeastern India. She has several publications and abstracts to her credit. And has dedicated her professional career to creating an equitable society for the most vulnerable and socially excluded populations. So over to you, Malika, for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sona. And it's really been great and very enriching to listen to all of the wonderful presentations and the tremendous work that's been happening. So I know I'm last on this session, and I would like to definitely go on record and say that the rest of my team, all of us who are leading the adolescent health vertical in KHPT, Satya, Maitre, who are kind of driving this whole thing from the front, and a lot of our field teams, and Sudeshna, all the co-authors for this abstract, they're all on this call. So I want to acknowledge that it's just me presenting, but it's all of them who put in the effort. So having said that, I'm just going to request the team to please start the presentation, and I will give you cues in terms of moving on to the slides.
Hi everyone, my name is Sudeshna De, and I work in Karnataka Health Promotion Trust, Bangalore, India. Today I'm going to present one of our intervention study that is called Sfoorti, and the paper we are presenting titled Power to Powerless, Marginalized Adolescent Girls Spearhead Social Change. To begin with, let us discuss the barriers faced by adolescent girls in India. Adolescent girls in India face barriers that restrict access to resources, education, employment, and health services, limit their agency and ability to make informed choices. Our study, that is Sfoorti study, is based on one of the districts in Karnataka state named Koppal. The fact from the Demographic and Health Survey, that is National Health Survey of India, WAVE 2015-16, suggests that 20% of girls drop out of school while transitioning to secondary education, 50% are anemic, and 33 deliver a child before age 20. Also that Koppal has high poverty and illiteracy rate, heightening the vulnerability of girls in terms of diminishing quality of life and lack of opportunity to participate in decisions. We implemented Sfoorti, a community-centered model, to train adolescent girls from marginalized communities as role models to champion among their peers and to improve education and health-related outcomes and influence community attitude and behaviors with the aim of improving overall adolescent well-being. This is the map of India. The green color shows the Karnataka state. Within that Karnataka state, there are districts from where Koppal district is selected for the study. In Koppal district, we have Koppal block, from which 51 villages selected for the study purpose. The Sfoorti study was implemented from the year 2015 and 18 in 51 villages of Koppal. It engaged with 640 role model adolescent girls aged 14 to 15 as intervention champions and included 3,600 girls aged 13 to 16 in the intervention as peers. The model we have used for the Sfoorti study is the Integrated Empowerment Framework, which is taken from the Blanchard et al. 2005. The model outlines pathways to empowerment by 3 power domains to train girls. It builds with power within, power with, and power over. Power within by increasing self-esteem, self-efficacy, decision-making and action. Power with by enhancing their ability to control resources and influencing parents, school authorities and local community structures. And lastly, the power over by building leadership, communication and relationship between girls and peers. The key findings related to education indicate that there is a significant reduction in the school dropout among girls aged 13 to 16 years in Sfoorti villages. In the baseline, the percentage was 29%. In the end line, the percentage reduced to 16%. The differences between endline and baseline is statistically significant. The differences of baseline and endline is also evident in the indicator of relationship with parents, decision making and empowerment. The first graph shows that there is a significant improvement in the parent-daughter relationship in terms of interaction, communication, and support to girls by both the parents. The second graph also shows a significant increase in the girls' participation in decision making with respect to marriage, mobility, schooling, and work. The third graph is also evident there is an increased level of empowerment in terms of self-esteem, self-efficacy, and individual agency among the girls. There is also significant differences between exposed versus non-exposed girls in key activities. The key three activities that we have considered in the analysis is the life skill education, exposure visit, and communication leadership development camp. The inline data findings suggest that there is a stronger parent-daughter relationship among girls who were exposed all the three key intervention, that is 61% highlighted in orange bar, compared to girls who were not exposed to any of these key interventions, that is 51% in blue bar. There is also a significant higher level of participation in decision making, that is 68% among those who exposed compared to those who were not. Also, significantly higher level of empowerment is observed in the finding in terms of self-esteem, self-efficacy, and individual agency among girls exposed to three intervention. Our key takeaway or key learning from the Sphoorti intervention study is that in the context of marginalized adolescent girls, empowered role models are powerful in their ability to shape the views, ideas, attitudes, behavior, and actions of peers and others in their immediate environment. These evidences from Sphoorti shows that community-centered intervention model that focus on the specific marginalized and vulnerable segments within the population will help drive long-term social changes. Adolescent empowering policies and practices can lead to improve health status, promote gender equity, and demand for services with long-term benefits to the individual, families, and society at large. There is a great potential for programs to move beyond a generic approach that positions marginalized girls as beneficiaries to a reformist approach that views them as empowered drivers of change.
So thank you so much for your patient hearing. We'll be happy to take more questions, and we'll be happy to also respond to any emails or further information you may want about the work that we do with adolescents in the most backward pockets of Karnataka, in districts like Koppal, Bijapur, which have consistently and traditionally sort of been extremely backward in terms of most of the human development indicators, and more particularly very negative gender norms. That's really what we're trying to change. So the great news is that KHPT over the last 2.5 years has been able to sustain these efforts with the active leadership of the role model girls who have now become transformation agents in the villages and in the local taluks that they work in. So any further information we'd be happy to provide. So I'll close here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Malika, and thank you for, again, sticking to the time. We are, as I mentioned, an extremely interesting presentation and your findings. I think there isn't enough research that has gone into the various domains of power and how that impacts the behaviors. So extremely interesting. So, we could probably take about 5 minutes to look at some of the questions, if that's okay with the participants. I know we have gone beyond time. So Vishaka, are there questions that haven't been answered in the chat that we could probably take up first?
So we don't have any questions that are left, and the one question that I have shared with you on personal chat.
Okay. I think there is one question on for the last presentation, which says that was a wonderful achievement. I seem to have missed it again. Right, so give me a minute to look at the chat.
I'm sending you again.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I seem to have missed the question. Yes, okay. So that was a wonderful achievement, especially empowering adolescent girls. Is there any KPAB survey conducted apart from the baseline and endline?
Can you please expand KPAB survey, please? We've basically done a baseline, a midline, and endline, apart from 2 other qualitative studies that happened during the course of the program. I also have Satya and Maitreyi on the call who can respond to that, but I don't know what is KPAB survey.
I'm presuming that's
it's
knowledge, practice,
yeah,
attitude, and behaviors.
Oh, yes, sure. So yes, we have assessed that as part of the baseline, midline, and endline. So what you see here is in terms of parent-daughter relationship and in the way that we went about defining empowerment itself are basically knowledge, attitude, and practice related questions. So right from the way that the girls perceive themselves, the way that they see themselves capable of handling challenges, and the kind of capacity that they feel that they have in terms of navigating those challenges and behavioral barriers, both in an individual and family and community levels were assessed during the course of these surveys. We'd be happy to throw more light on it. We have a few publications that have come out of this work, and we could even share it with the organizers to, to disseminate it on this team of participants. We'd be happy to do so.
Right, sure. Thank you. And I think there is one more question for Kavita. It talks about, the game requires to have girls access to smartphones, right? And it's probably urban or peri-urban focused only. So would you like to throw a little more light on that, Kavita?
Sure. So yes, it's a D2C. The game has been developed as a response to a D2C challenge, which is a direct-to-consumer approach for adolescent health. So the winning idea was a mobile game. So yes, it's a mobile game. It requires a smartphone, but I think data from all our sources, which is really data from the gaming community, which is about 250 million and growing, reveals that 45% are women and of all age groups, especially amongst the young. And this thing, Ludo is very popular, just to give you an example, a game that girls like to play. I think the other thing is that we're not solving for mobile games growth in India. That's not the project. So yes, whoever has access or shared access because of COVID, girls have access to phones. They have been given phones for studying. They've been given phones because they need to access their classes through smartphones. And therefore, we believe that the game will reach a significant number of girls. And this number will only grow in the future. And we're also looking at collaborating with community level projects which are working with girls. So there we believe it will really help through partnerships with mobile players, with mobile, like with smartphone manufacturers, with mobile players, with other corporates who can sponsor mobile phones. And we can plan and deliver, the game, which is a tool really that can then be played in, by girls who have access to phones. So my answer to this is that the game does not solve for lack of access to mobile phones. the game solves for those girls who have access to mobile phones, and this number is really growing. And it's not a small number, actually.
Okay, okay. That's quite clear. And I think a lot of us here would be interested to look at the details of the game. So if you have a link that there people can look at or play the game ourselves, please do share that.
Yeah, so it's going to be launched in May, so I cannot give
okay.
access before that.
Okay.
But definitely in May 2022, everybody in this community is going to get a link to the game. So yes, and it's going to be free of cost.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I did have a question on that, but I'll come back to you, Kavita. And there is another question for Malika, which says, which is the power status and sorry, these messages seem to jump. Okay, power status and decision making rests at multiple levels in a community. Do throw some light on the particular power equations in the community. This is for you, Malika.
In fact, I was just typing a response to that, Sona, thanks. Yes, I think Bhavani, you're absolutely right. I mean, power does play out in extremely complex ways within the community. So we decided to look at 3 critical domains of power, which is power within. And we defined it primarily looking at building power within in the sense of enhancing self-esteem, self-efficacy amongst the adolescent girls. And then we looked at power with, which is largely around power, which is largely collective power. So what does the power that the adolescent girls have with their peers or with their parents who form their immediate ecosystem? And we then looked at power over. Usually this kind of interplay is not linear, it's kind of mixed up. So in terms of power over, we looked at the bargaining, negotiating, ability to change, influence, certain kinds of behaviors or practices at the community level. So that is like power over, where they're able to change the status quo. So we looked at these 3 domains of power, and we've defined them we've looked at a few statements that can actually help define them. And in fact, right now we are working on a paper that clearly talks about how we define empowerment and how we define the 3 domains of empowerment as an organization. And the paper is in the final stages, and we're quite excited that it would be a very interesting learning to share with the rest of the players in the field of adolescent health. Because what we also see is, while we speak a lot about empowerment in the context of adolescent girls, more particularly from vulnerable populations, we do not know how exactly to define empowerment and to be able to show the linkages and the association of empowerment with public health outcomes. Because for us at KHPT, we are a public health organization. So all that we do will have to primarily lead to certain outcomes like, say, improve nutrition among adolescent girls, or improve menstrual hygiene, or decrease gender-based violence and experience of gender-based violence amongst adolescent girls. So that's primarily our focus as part of our charter. So that's been our effort as well, to understand the complex interactions between these different power domains and see how and what aspects of it actually lead to certain outcomes, on adolescent health itself. So yeah, I think over the next few months, hopefully there will be an interesting scientific publication coming out of this evidence that we have. And of course, happy to share that with the rest of you.
Thank you, Malika. We look forward to receiving that, the details, although we may not be directly in touch. So maybe if you can share it with the organizers, and they will probably make sure that it gets to the rest of us.
Sure, Sona. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And I think I have one last question for Kavita, and we will probably close after that, unless we have any further questions. Kavita, I'm connecting your presentation to the presentation on the backlash. So is there, what were the precautions or the risk mitigation measures that you took to ensure that there is no backlash, especially for something like a game on reproductive health, which talks about sex? And so yes, what were the precautions?
So I think the way is that I don't think there are precautions that we took, because the game is not launched right now, but we are going to take precautions, is the right thing to say. So yes, we have plans for, we did consider all these when we were doing the design testing session. One of the things that we have constantly found that relationship status, for instance, is something girls don't want to reveal. And they don't want to talk about it. And the reason they don't, and there's good reason. And exactly like you said, the backlash presentation really tells us about girls, what they can face when they are in a situation that requires for them to express, their choices, express their voice, stand up for what is actually their right. So any program, any project that actually deals with sexual reproductive health has to take some mitigation measures. So yes, as a project which is endeavoring to do exactly that, we have a plan for risk mitigation that we are going to be launching in around 2 to 3 months just before the game. We've had various meetings with people who've been working in the community. Essentially, we've had meetings with Dasra, which did a backlash report. We've had an initial meeting with Breakthrough, which does a lot of work in this area. We've also connected with, grassroots organizations where we did the design testing sessions. So there too, we have, and with Girl Effect, which is our research partner who did the formative research for us. So we are going to have a full strategy for this. And I'd really like to invite anybody who wants to contribute to planning for game launch and planning for this, game to be introduced in the community, or rather online. If you would like to join us when we do this entire planning process, please do send me a mail. Having said that, I think nothing in the game is really outside of what is in the sexual reproductive health curriculum as it goes. I know the social right now it's a school wellness program and it's no longer RKSK, but nothing in the game is actually outside of that. In fact, the game actually gives resources for girls to mitigate risks. There is a complete episode on consent, which actually handles, the entire thing of you have the right to say no. You have the right to recognize, what is not okay with you and put an end to it. Even the 5th episode, which is really about delaying early marriage, talks about, the legal provisions and the rights that you have, that you can take. Again, we are looking to collaborate with agencies on the ground who can actually give us more resources that can be made available online through this game. So that's really what I'd like to say here. I hope that answers your question, Sona.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Kavita. And for all those who are interested, and I would certainly be interested in the planning exercise, we will be in touch with you, Kavita. So thank you for that. And I think I would like to thank all the participants for their patience and for staying through the session, but also big thank you to all the presenters, Sucharita, Kavita, Yasmin, Kuhika, and Malika. Thank you for the extremely interesting presentations. I think all their presentations will be uploaded on the website, and the link will be shared with you. So thank you all and have a good day.